Good evening, everybody. My name is David Myers. I teach Jewish history here at UCLA, and I direct the UCLA Bedari Kindness Institute. I'd like to thank you all for coming to tonight's event, which we look forward to with great anticipation. Let me just say, if you have an empty seat, I think we're good, but maybe raise your hand for those of you. Okay, so there are still choice seats to be had. Maybe just raise again because we have some more people. Empty seats are next to the people who've raised their hands. I want to say that to all who are marking Ramadan, we'd like to wish you a Ramadan Mubarak. And I'd like to begin by thanking those who made tonight's event possible, beginning with our incredible Bedari Kindness Institute, or as we call it, BKI staff, Maya Ferdman, Megan Cox, Amalia Mora, Felicia Graham, and Maria Patlan. Thank you so much for all that you do to make BKI such a joy to be part of. And our dear friends from the Social Sciences Development Office, Peter Evans and Dory Jacobs, thank you so much for all that you have done. Thank you. I also want to thank our co-sponsor for tonight's event, the UCLA Center for the Study of Religion. Thank you for your kind support. And with that, I want to just begin with a question. I mean, you might ask why UCLA has an institute devoted to kindness. We might quote, as Father Greg does, the author George Saunders, who writes that kindness is the only non-delusional response to everything. I think that covers just about everything, Father Greg. Would that the whole world agreed, however, with that. All too often, it seems as if the opposite of kindness rules: dehumanization, mean-spiritedness, hate. What are we to do? One thing we should remember, as the social psychologist Jamil Zaki, who was a visitor here at UCLA last year, reminds us, kindness is not innate, but rather acquired. It is not a trait. It's a skill. We can build it up, and we must. And again, we ask, what is the mission of an institution devoted to the pursuit of knowledge, if not to address this fundamental human and global need to build up the capacity for kindness? So the question is then not, why does UCLA have an institute devoted to the study of kindness, but how could it not? Thus, the Bedari Kindness Institute. And what you might ask, does it do? Well, it's actually comprised of 3 units: the Initiative to Study Hate, which over the course of 4 years has built up a community of scholars numbering over 130 at UCLA, devoted to studying various aspects of hate as it takes rise in individuals and groups. It also includes the Bedari Kindness Institute, the Dialogue Across Difference Initiative, which provides critical training to hundreds of students, staff, and faculty every quarter. And it includes a sub-version of the Bedari Kindness Institute, whose mission is to support cutting-edge research that explains where kindness comes from, how the kindness muscle can be fortified, and what the best ways to translate research into meaningful change are. One of the ways we engage in this work of translation is through our Compassionate Conversations series, of which tonight's event is an installment, and which is part of a wider university undertaking known as the Campus Community Conversation. Our goal in this series, the Compassionate Conversation series, is twofold: to share important research trends about kindness and to build up our capacity to engage in hard conversations across difference. I'd like to invite you all to come to the next installment in our series, which will be on April 15th, when we host here at UCLA the nationally renowned scholar John A. Powell from UC Berkeley, who will speak about his work on bridging and building. By engaging in conversations across difference, we demonstrate our powers of curiosity, a word that is etymologically and conceptually related to care. By caring about difference, we build up our capacity to care, to take interest in the other, and by extension, to be kind. All of this, the quest for curiosity, the urgency of care brings us to tonight. One of the great enigmas in thinking about kindness and the world as we know it, not the world as we would want it to be, is what is the place of religion. Religion is at once the incubator of the most sublime moral values and the site of divisive, bellicose, and violent impulses. We need the best of religion in these most challenging and fragile of times. It so often seems as if our world is irreparably broken. Ukraine, 4 years after Russia's invasion, Gaza, Sudan, Minneapolis. Where are we to turn? What can nurture and sustain at this moment of seeming rupture? Is the quest for justice Sisyphean, like the tragic Greek hero who pushes the boulder up the hill only to have it continually roll back down? If anyone can help us make sense of the world and our responsibility in it, it's the people from whom we're going to hear tonight. They're a remarkable quartet of spiritual leaders who are profound meaning makers, guiding the rest of us not only to make sense of the world, but to make it better. And we're really honored to have them here with us tonight. We're curious to know how each of you draws on your faith traditions to ward off despair in these dark times and proceed with the task of promoting love, justice, and kindness. And I must confess, I'm feeling very optimistic tonight, not just because of our distinguished guests, but because I and my wife became first-time grandparents yesterday. Sharon, that was your prompt to come. So here's how the evening will work. I'll very briefly introduce our panelists, even though none of them really requires an introduction. We'll have a conversation on stage for about 45 minutes. Then we'll open up for your questions. If you'd like to answer a question, please use the QR code on the screen in front of you. Our team will collect the questions and pass them on to the stage to be addressed. Maya, you did tell me there was a URL. It's there. So if you can also use that QR code, and if not that, the URL address to ask your question. After the program ends, there will be a reception to which you are all invited. You're also welcome to stay to purchase books from our panelists and get them signed. But for that to happen, you'll need to let our panelists get to the tables outside. So please do not rush the stage to ask them questions, surround them, and make it hard for them to get outside. I also want to mention that we're going to have tables staffed by our Bedari Kindness Institute interns who are curious to hear what your impressions of the evening were, what you're sitting with, and they're going to be there to interview you, record you, and gauge your impressions of tonight. So with that, I'm going to move back to a seat. My introductions will be very brief, so we can move along. Father Greg Boyle is a Jesuit priest, founder and director of Homeboy Industries, the world's largest gang intervention rehabilitation program. He has a very long and distinguished record that I'm not going to rehearse, but I'll just say he's the author most recently of a wonderful book that I recommend that you all read and purchase called Cherish Belonging, The Healing Power of Love in a Divided Times. Welcome, Father Greg. Rabbi Sharon Brous is the senior and founding rabbi of IKAR, a Jewish spiritual community in Los Angeles. She is, therefore, by definition, a Jewish spiritual leader, and the author of the Amen Effect, Ancient Wisdom to Mend Our Broken Hearts and World. Welcome, Rabbi Sharon Brous. Valarie Kaur is a civil rights leader and activist, Sikh spiritual leader, filmmaker, educator, and founder of the Revolutionary Love Project, a movement to reclaim love as a force for justice. She has written about that last idea in her book, See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. And it, along with Rabbi Brous's extraordinary The Amen Effect and the book I mentioned by Father Boyle, are absolutely imperative reads for you all. Welcome, Valarie. And last but not least, Imam Dr. Jihad Turk is a distinguished scholar, Muslim spiritual leader, and the founding president of the Bayan Islamic Graduate School, a preeminent Muslim institution of higher education. Welcome, Jihad Turk. Okay, so I want to begin by offering everybody the opportunity to get everybody, to get to know everybody, so we can sort of enter into a deep conversation. And I just want to ask each of you where you come from spiritually. I have a beloved friend who's been an incredible supporter of this university by the name of Meyer Luskin. And I once had the opportunity to interview him in a series where I interviewed various leaders from different walks of life. And I would ask people, where do you come from? And they'd often say, I come from Boyle Heights, I come from the Lower East Side. Meyer Luskin answered, I come from love. So in that tradition, Father Greg, I'm going to ask you, where do you come from spiritually?
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you. I feel badly because these seats are reserved for panelists, and as you can see, we have seats. So
anyone
maybe,
brave enough to sit in the front row?
Yeah, maybe not. I take it you're Catholic since you're not sitting in the front row.
Jews know that trick too.
I'm a Jesuit, like Pope Francis. I'm just saying, but so anyway, I come from that. I'm kind of a Jesuit, a part-time Buddhist, so I'm kind of a whole bunch of things. But so St. Ignatius of Loyola founded the Jesuits, and so there's a kind of a charism and a spirit to that. He has a reflection of the spiritual exercises called the Two Standards, and it says simply, see Jesus standing in the lowly place. And that's kind of a guiding thing for me, because it doesn't have Jesus standing outside of the lowly place, pointing at the lowly place, asking you to get your butts over to the lowly place. It just says, see him standing there. So that's the thing I return to all the time. And you go, why is he standing there? What's he feeling there? And so I always think, well, that's where the joy is, in the lowly place. So that's kind of where I am. I'm probably a Jesuit first, and before all the kind of the Catholic stuff. But
you grew up in a very Catholic environment.
Yeah.
You grew up in a large Catholic family. You went to Catholic institutions, high school,
there's no question.
Gonzaga.
Jesuits are Catholic. Let me just.
Jesuits are Catholic. So listen, I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania,
let me just make this point.
Which has a Jesuit institution, and I think that proposition might be disputed by some of the people I met.
I'm sure. But anyway.
But I hear in you something of a sense that you have transcended, as it were, your Catholic roots. Am I reading you correctly in thinking like, it's not really how I see myself?
Well, of course, Catholic means universal.
It does.
So you want to be able to, we were talking earlier about the spacious God, So that's what I'm interested in, expansive, spacious God. How do we imagine a circle of compassion? And then how do we imagine nobody standing outside of it? That's what matters to me. Right. Not, how many people are in the church, or, right. Did you go to Sunday Mass or something like that? Those are the things that matter.
But it's important to state that you are, in that regard, a follower of Jesus and Jesus' vision.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Sharon, how do you answer that question? Where do you come from spiritually?
So first, what a joy to be with all of you, and thank you to my good friend, Professor David Myers, for inviting us to sit together. It's really an honor and a joy. Where do I come from spiritually? I'm a Jew. I come from the suburbs in New Jersey, geographically. We sometimes call the home country. But my spiritual life, I think, was born the moment that I recognized that the core teaching of our tradition is that every human being is created in God's own image. And because I wasn't raised, I was raised with a very strong Jewish identity, but not religious. So I learned this for the first time when I was like 19 years old, which is an incredible gift because it just knocked me off my feet. I mean, imagine the audacity of a tradition that says that every single human being is created in God's own image, and that our work as human beings is to build a society worthy of the images of God before us. And I look every day at the gap between the world as it ought to be and the world as it is. I see before us an extraordinary amount of work that we need to do to continue to strive to create the conditions that would be worthy of the human beings around us. But I really believe that. It's core to my faith, and it's core to my politics, and it's core to my understanding of the world. Human beings can be incredibly difficult and sometimes really cruel, and every one of us has the spark of the divine within. And so just imagine if we could actually see that in each other and engage the world that way. It would change everything, really change everything. And there's a tradition, in our tradition, the Midrash says, the rabbis say that every blade of grass came into being in the world because an angel sang its song, and it came through the earth's surface. And so too, every human being, wherever we walk, there's a procession of angels surrounding us, blowing shofarot, blowing trumpets, and saying, "Make way for an image of the Holy One is approaching." And I just try to hold that image and imagine if every single one could actually be held that way with love and grace, and what are each of us willing to do to help get there.
Right, thank you. Valarie.
Oh, I love that so much. I am so grateful to be here with all of you and my beloved brothers, my sister on the stage who inspire me every day. This is how we carry each other through the impossible. Thank you. I come from my ancestors. My story begins with my grandfather who sailed by steamship from India to California in 1913. I grew up on the land that my grandparents farmed as Punjabi Sikh farmers. And I remember riding on tractors with my father and gazing up at all the stars at night and talking to the cows across the fence. It was as if I could look upon the face of anyone and say, "You are a part of me I do not yet know." Do you remember that sense of wonder as a child? That sense of connection? Do you remember the first time it was dimmed? I was 6 years old as a little girl in the schoolyard when the boy ran up to me and said, "Get up, you black dog." That was my racial slur. I wanted to correct him. I was playing a baby, not a dog, but there was cruelty around his eyes as if he had been given a script that he was just enacting. And I wasn't angry with the boy, I was just ashamed. Oh, I had never seen myself through your eyes before. And what it felt like was stinging under the skin. They call it internalized oppression, but what it sounds like is a voice in your head that says you're not good enough, you're not strong enough, smart enough, you're not enough, you're not enough. And that voice might have colonized the rest of me, except I went home to my family, to my grandparents, my grandfather, Papaji, a man with a tall turban and long white beard. He just scooped me up and he dried my tears and he said, "My dear, do not abandon your post." I'm a little girl in 2 long braids who likes to ride tractors and talk to the stars, but my grandfather saw me as a warrior. And he began to tell me stories of my Sikh ancestors. 500 years ago, this community of mystics and poets that believed in this vision of oneness, Ik Onkar, this oneness ever unfolding, that all of us through music and poetry and song can close our eyes and have those moments where the line between you and me blurs. That separateness is an illusion, that we're all part of that one circle. Nako beri nehi begana, I see no enemy, I see no stranger. This community of mystics, this liberation experiment, where there was no caste, no hierarchy, it posed a threat to those who wished to rule by authoritarian power back in South Asia. And when the Mughal Empire came to crush our ancestors, we might have been disappeared from the face of the planet, except something very unusual happened in the course of human history. This community of mystics resisted. They became warriors. And so the Sant Sipahi tradition was born, that we are called to be sage warriors. The sage sees through the eyes of love, that connection with everyone and everything. But the warrior puts that love into action. What my grandfather was telling me was like, don't let anyone have the power to make you hate them or to make you hate yourself. That we are called to face the hot winds of the world with the eyes of a sage, the heart of a warrior. The warrior fights, the sage loves. It is a path of revolutionary love. I nodded and I made a promise to my grandfather. And truly, I feel like my whole life since then has been this glorious attempt to keep that promise, not to abandon my post. And it is very hard right now to stand in love and humanity, very hard. But the fact that all of you are here gathering around this question of kindness and what it means to lead with justice, belonging, forgiveness, it means that you know that love inside of you is a force, that the world wants to make you believe that you are naive or unserious about power for believing in love as a force, but this is the only thing that will carry us through this time. And each of these leaders on this stage live it, live it. So let us inspire each other tonight to keep living it.
Thank you, Valarie. Jihad, the question was...
You want me to follow that? What she said. My mom is from Oklahoma. She's a Methodist. My father is from Jerusalem. So I say my mom is from the Midwest and my dad is from the Mideast. And, you know, growing up in Arizona with a name like Jihad, in the 70s, I was, a little bit of a walking teaching moment. Still am. But my faith tradition, my wisdom tradition is Islam, and I'm going to just share a story that I think encapsulates where I come from spiritually. So one day, this is about 1,400 years ago, Muhammad was he was forming community. He was a community organizer. And we actually teach a course at the seminary that I run called Muhammad as a Community Organizer. And he was, gathering people and providing some spiritual wisdom. And some individual, random person came into the prayer space and he told the people who were surrounding him, he said, "See that guy over there? He's guaranteed salvation." And they looked at him and they didn't see anything extraordinary about him. So one of the guys hatched a plot. He said, "I'm going to make up an excuse and I'm going to go and hang out with that guy." So he goes up and he shows up at the guy's door and he goes, "My wife and I were fighting. She kicked me out. Can I stay with you for 3 days?" So the guy's like, "Sure." So he stayed with him for 3 days and he just was observing him like a hawk. And he said there was nothing extraordinary about the guy. He didn't do extra prayers. He wasn't extra charitable. He wasn't extra anything. He was just a normal guy. And at the end, he went up to him and he confessed. He goes, "You know what? I made up the story so I can spend time with you. The prophet said this thing about you, that you are guaranteed salvation. You're guaranteed paradise. What is it about you that makes you so special?" And he thought for a second. He goes, "There's not really anything." And then, so the guy started walking away. He goes, wait, there might be one thing. And he goes, "Yeah, tell me, what is it?" He goes, "Every night before I sleep, I rid my heart of any animosity or hatred for any other human being. I empty my heart of all of the hatred that might have accumulated towards any other person. That is my spiritual tradition."
Thank you. And now you'd like me to follow that with a hard question to everybody, which really calls upon us to reflect upon religion as it is, not as we would like it to be. Because not only is the world broken, religion has been deployed as a force of division in the world. And so my question is, what's gone wrong here? What has gone wrong with the world we live in which religion emerges as a force of division? Is it religion? Is it incorrect interpretations of religion? Is it the necessary exclusionary nature of truth claims and hearing in especially monotheistic traditions? How can we understand, you people who live and teach and act every day in the world, what has gone wrong with religion? Yeah.
All right. So in 2000, I came to UCLA to do my doctorate in Islamic studies. And I was studying early Islamic legal theory, from 1,200 years ago. And 9/11 happened, my second year into my doctoral program. And I continued my degree, but on the side, I was TAing and taking classes in modern Middle Eastern history and culture and, political science. And I was really trying to ask myself the question, for Islam in particular, this religion that I find pure, a model for my own spiritual growth, the fulfillment of my human potential, how is it invoked to justify great harm towards other human beings? And so on the side, I was really studying that as a secondary topic. And I finally, after a number of years, got clarity. You want me to tell you? Okay. So David has actually heard this before because we both are guest speakers at a Muslim-Jewish dialogue group called New Ground, and then they have one for high school students called Magic, Muslims and Jews Inspiring Change. So we've, my daughter has gone through that program, and I don't know if your daughter as well, and your daughter as well. So, these are real conversations, and it's awesome to see them, grow as young adults in this context. But I'm going to start with the conclusion. I'm just going to make it really short, though, and then fill in. The conclusion is religion is not the cause of the conflict, but could, if it's invoked properly, be part of the solution. And that the one lens that we can look, the unifying lens, all of the conflict, the violence that we see around the world, is a clash of nationalism or ultranationalism. It's the story of who we tell ourselves that we are in this modern world. We are a nation of X, Y, or Z, and they are our enemy from the other nation. And sometimes it's across borders, and sometimes it's within borders. And sometimes part of that nationalist identity involves language, culture, history, land, and religion. Religion is part of that sort of marker for who we are as our modern tribe, our tribal affiliation. And I would say that it's not the values of the religions or the teachings of the religions that are manifest in these nationalist struggles. It's oftentimes very contrary. And I was invited by a Catholic bishop once to, shortly after 9/11 to give a talk. And he said, I'm going to invite this Muslim Imam to talk about what's going on in the world and that involves conflict and Muslims. And he said, I just want to point out that, many of you Catholics are from Ireland, and we had the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And those who would invoke, who are from a Catholic, raising the Catholic banner, but would engage in asymmetrical warfare or terrorism or bombings of this or that. It's not justifiable by the values of our religion, even though that they were, they identified as Catholic. They weren't representing Catholicism. It was a Catholic nationalist movement in Northern Ireland. So similarly, so that was how he sort of, made sure the audience didn't look at me with too harsh of a gaze. But I'm going to pause or stop here. But you can look through all of the different conflicts around the world, whether it was the Basques in northern Spain, where it wasn't really religion that was the dividing marker. It was the other aspects of modern identity, or the many conflicts in which religion is the dividing line. And sometimes it's very blurred. So if you look at it, I'll just give this one context. If you remember when we invaded Iraq, you had the Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Kurds. And they were all fighting each other. because they really wanted their own small mini nation state. And the Kurds in the north were fighting against the Sunnis, right? What religion were the Kurds? They were Sunni Muslims, just like the Sunnis that they were fighting. But the news didn't know how to cover it because they were fighting against each other. And so those are the Sunnis against the Kurds. Well, Sunnis is a religion, a religious denomination within Islam. The Kurds were also Sunni Muslim, but they're just looking for the soundbite, and they don't really know how to cover it. And so from the way that it's portrayed in the media, it's like, oh, these religious sects are fighting against each other. And it was really just two nationalist identities that were pitted against each other. So, in conclusion, I would say that religion can be part of the problem because our religions, when understood correctly, even though they might give us a very particular roadmap of how we can become our best selves, they all have at their core a teaching of the dignity of all of humanity in one way, shape, or form. And I think that if we take religion seriously, it will help us to elevate above our tribalism, our religious tribalism that separates us and pits us against one another.
Right. I don't mean to sow division tonight. That's not my goal. But there is another way to see.
Be kind.
But there is another way to that this question has been posed and responded to, which is to say, as against the view that Scripture represents the perfect Word of God. Scripture contains principles of love and it contains principles of hate, principles of peace and principles of violence. And our job, it's not just reducible to errant interpretation, it's actually a matter of choosing that which speaks most to our value set. So I'm wondering if others want to weigh in on this question about, religion as a source of good or as part of the problem. So.
Well, to pick up on your point, I have come to think about our religious traditions as giant treasure chests. And if you open up that treasure chest, you look inside, and there are stories and songs and scriptures and poems and histories and legends. It's so rich. And in every treasure chest, there are stones that you can pick up. There are passages you can pick. There are stories you can pick up that are like jagged rocks. Like you can use them to divide the world into us and them, saved and unsaved. Push people across the line and call them illegal, savage, criminal, sinister, sinful, terrorist, or domestic terrorist, right? You can do anything to them. We know that the history of the soil are people who have colonized this land and committed genocide on this land and enslaved people on this land who had these stones in their hands. White supremacy has always gone hand in hand with Christian supremacy in the United States. But if we look deeper into that treasure chest, at the very heart of all of our traditions is a mystical stream, a mystical heart. And in that mystical heart, there are diamonds. The passages, the stories, the songs, the scriptures that hold up a vision of love above all. A circle of care that leaves no one behind. And all of our wisest ancestors, for thousands of years, the spiritual teachers, the visionaries in all our traditions, the social reformers have chosen to pick up the diamonds, to stand on the mountaintop and give a vision of a world that leaves no one behind, where love is the way, the truth, and the light. Love is everything. I believe that it is our turn, it is our time to decide what we want to pick up from the treasure chests that we have been given. And what has been so inspiring to me is that each of the people on this stage are the ones who are holding the diamonds in their hands. And you get to decide, what are you holding? How are you brave with your love? How are you leading with love? And then the question is not whether religion is useful or not, it's which ancestral wisdom will birth the world to come.
The jagged stones or the diamonds.
Right. There are no true or false interpretations in my view. There are only those that destroy the world and those that create the world that we want. So choose the ones and lead with the ones that create the world we want.
Okay. Sharon?
First, I want to say, as a religious Jew, an observant Jew, one of the greatest pains for me is when I see people who are knowledgeable about our Jewish tradition and who take it seriously and observe and practice in ritual form our Jewish tradition, and then engage in profoundly inhumane ways in the world. And I suspect that people who take seriously other faith traditions feel the same way. It feels like a kind of personal loss that's hard to describe, because something that I love so deeply is being used in a way that's so unthinkable from what it's intended. I think about David Steindl-Rast, actually, the Benedictine monk who maybe is a friend of yours. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm not quoting Father Greg, I'm quoting David Steindl-Rast, who has this incredible metaphor of the volcano that he writes about, that for me was very helpful in understanding what has gone wrong with religion. He says that every mystical tradition begins like a volcanic eruption, that when it happens, it's fiery and gorgeous and radiant and powerful, and then the lava pours down the side of the mountain, the side of the volcano, and at some point sort of settles on the ground. And if you walk by a couple hundred years later, you'll have no idea of what the original experience was. And he says, so too with all of our religious traditions, that they all started with something so powerful, so unspeakably moving and beautiful, a revelation to one person or to 2 million people standing at the base of a mountain or wherever we stood. And yet we try to create containers to hold the power of that experience, and we forget that the container is not the experience. And so we end up kind of obsessively focusing on the external elements of our traditions. And he says, so rituals become ritualistic and morals become moralistic. And we become so focused on the rules and the laws that we might forget the soul and what the thing was created to hold in the inside. And I feel already together, we've been together for a couple of hours because we had a beautiful gathering with a couple of students earlier. And I think what's so powerful to me about this evening is that it is a choice to choose not to abandon the shell. I mean, people always say, well, Heschel prayed with his feet. And it's like, yeah, he also prayed in shul on Shabbat. Like, he didn't only pray with his feet. He also had a serious religious observance and practice. It's not to choose the stuff, the soul of it, at the expense of the external. It's to say that I will not engage in the external symbols and rituals and traditions at the expense of the heart. And I think the heart is love. I think Meyer Luskin's right. I think the heart is love. The heart is human dignity. Someone recently, a colleague, called me elegantly monocausal. It's such a dig. It's such a great dig. And I said, what's my monocause? Love? Is that because if that's the case, I'm okay with it.
You're guilty. Right?
I'm guilty. And so, but the funny thing was that when I shared it with my community, they thought I said elegantly menopausal, not elegantly monocausal, which is like fantastic. But anyway, elegantly So I think.
Anyway.
But anyway, I think that we do forget. We forget what we're doing all of this for. And to my mind, all these rituals, all of the rituals of an observant Jew, and there are many, and we have on this stage an observant Muslim who just broke fast, and many people in the room, I'm sure, who are observing the fast during Ramadan. And when we take seriously the religious traditions, those rituals they matter profoundly. They shape our lives. They shape our everyday. And yet, if we don't ask the question of what is this for, why are we doing this, who am I called to become in the world, then it can so easily become distorted and be a force for real harm in the world. All of our traditions can do that and have done that, right? And so that's something we have to be, I think, very vigilant about.
I mean, it's such a recurrent pattern in history, which is the classic conundrum of institutionalizing the revolution. Like, something is always lost, I mean, in that process, right? The fervor, the passion, the moral calling, right, yields to ritualized assertions of power and tedium. So it's such a how do we overcome that. It's so recurrent of an impulse. And Father Greg, I wonder, I mean, you were talking earlier with our students about religion not really being a category that interests you, but it's nonetheless a problem in society, right? Is it not? I hope I didn't create a problem for you now.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'm just not. It doesn't feel like it's. I love the interfaith connection of the four of us, but you want to kind of broaden this thing so people don't feel like, well, I don't really connect with Roman Catholicism or whatever. But I want, at the very beginning, you quoted George Saunders, and you said the only non-delusional response to everything is kindness. And then you said, but like in the world at the moment, not everybody buys that. But when you said that line, what happened in the room? People gave great assent to it. People affirmed it. Now, who are the people who go like this when they hear that line? Are they Democrats? Catholic? I mean, again, who gives assent to that sentence? Well, as soon as it was the first time I heard it, and I'm sure it's the same time you did, we went, oh yeah, my God, that's great. Which is why you quote these things over and over again, because yeah, that's great. I think that's great. But who gives assent to that sentence? I think people who are healthy give assent to that sentence. It's not about a political party or partisanship or even religion. It's about when people are whole and well, they give assent to that sentence. So I only know one thing, and it's not Roman Catholicism, it's Homeboy Industries. And so for 42 years walking with gang members, folks come in and they're barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And then you end up discovering the only thing that can scale that wall is tenderness, is loving kindness, metta, kind of in the Buddhist sense. And should I stop talking?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yes, could you ask Father Greg to stop talking?
Could you suggest he speed it up? But but we talk, Valarie was saying, separation is an illusion. Yes, you give assent to that. You go, yes. But who gives assent to that? Well, somebody who went to seminary? No. Healthy people go, oh yeah, that's right. And, so like the moral quest has never kept us moral. It's only kept us from each other. And so I'm okay with abandoning it, because in the end, gang members have taught me that everything's about something else, and everything is kind of the byproduct of this is this. So I see gang violence and you go, oh gosh, it's about hate. Well, no, it isn't. It's about a lethal absence of hope. Then you go, okay, what if we were to supply hope? Wow, what happened to the violence? It went away. It was about something else. And I think we're so notoriously not good at naming things correctly. And so if we could just unify ourselves and walk each other home, as Ram Dass would say, and I would add to health and wholeness. But healthy people are kind, not moral people. Healthy people are kind. Healthy people are loving. These are the indicators. And that's why at Homeboy, somebody comes in and they're filled with rage. That's okay. We got you. And it's like, then they move through anger into sadness at what's happened to them in their lives. And then they move to a sense of compassion born of having been cherished. So if it's true that the traumatized are likely to cause trauma, it has to be equally true that the cherished are going to be able to find their way to the joy of cherishing. So at no point are we saying, read your Bible, and that's a good thing. But we're not saying that. We're just loving people, because it's the only way people are going to know their true selves in loving is by being loved. And then they're going to go, wait a minute, loving is my home. I'm never going to be homesick because loving is my home. That's the transformation from somebody wounded to somebody more whole. And wholeness ends in the graveyard, I acknowledge that. But that's what we're walking each other home to. Not a creedal basis or a list of things but everybody in this room, maybe there were a few who, I don't believe in that George Saunders quote, maybe, I don't know. But pretty much people went like this. Yes, this is good. And we have, and that's not a moral judgment. It's a health assessment. You know, if people nod at that sentence by George Saunders, it's an indicator. And at Homeboy, I point to people who are working at Homeboy, you know, you kind of see this every day. When somebody lashes out or says something awful, you go, nobody's toppled by it. They're not tripped up by violence even. You just go, yeah, what language is this violence speaking? Oh, okay, I see it. Find the thorn underneath is what the homies always say. And it's a way of understanding and trying to be, you know, the spacious God that we want to be in the world who that God is, compassionate, loving, and kind. So I think we get, stuff kind of muddies up the waters, you know, and it keeps us from making progress because we don't want to get stuck, you know, insisting that religion be something that, I'm glad we come from our traditions. But there's something so unifying, when we were talking earlier, totally unifying. We're on the same page. And it's about, you know, love is the answer. Read that note that says, tell them to shut up.
Please ask Father Greg to shut up. It says, remind people to ask questions using QR code. So please use the QR code or you can log into that web address. Well, I want to, you know, I guess, against your own desires, make a theologian out of you. I mean, insofar as you and Valarie make very clear in your book that everybody is infinitely good, and that, you know, what we often understand to be, and I guess this is the point about naming, what we often understand to be evil or sin, right, isn't that. You make the point in your book that it's often, you know, what we mistake as evil or sin is a mental health issue. So I'm curious, like, how far you go in arguing about sin and evil. Like, what is that? A category error that the philosophers and theologians have foisted upon us?
Yeah, okay. Pretty much. You know, I the other day was the gospel was Jesus is eating with Levi, the tax collector, who's considered a public sinner, and the Pharisees are grumbling because he's doing that, and that's where Jesus says, you know, the doctor is for the people who are ill, and so the Pharisees see sin, and Jesus sees health. And I think that's important because he can get underneath stuff and say, and again, you know, I come from an experience of, I remember once a probation officer said, hey, do me a favor, don't even try to help Fernie, gang member. Okay, he's pure evil. And I thought, wow, boy, I don't even get that. He ended up being the very first person we honored as the Homeboy hero at our gala dinner 20 years ago. Obviously, it was a preposterous thing to say. But it's important to say because even people who might agree with us in terms of what's happening currently, like with ICE, where they go, you said you were going to get the worst of the worst. You know, I go, I know that's a category that's preposterous. It's just preposterous. And so that's why it's important for healthy people to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing stops. to stand with the disposable so that they will come when we stop throwing people away, to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. We don't make these distinctions that say, you know, okay, you can get them, or they're bad, you know. None of that stuff is true. It's unsophisticated for us to do that because it's the mystical view is really the view. It's the lens. You know, the Buddhists talk about wiping the lens. Oh, that's what you want to see. I understand you. I get it. Let's help you. And we want to imagine the day when policing is obsolete and prisons are empty. It's okay to want that. We were talking about this earlier. And then we will have decided to no longer punish wound, but to heal it. We're not there yet. I mean, we're inching. And so that didn't answer your question, but
Thank you. It answered a lot of questions, though, if not mine. Valarie, I want to hear your thought.
Answered your
Evil
question.
and sin, you know, you too have sort of urged us to kind of extirpate from our vocabulary and our view of the world those categories.
There are no such thing as monsters in this world. Only human beings who are wounded, who act out of their insecurity, their fear, their trauma, their greed, their rage. That does not make them any less dangerous. But when we choose to see their story and see their wound, they lose their power over us. We become free. And so instead of reacting endlessly from our own trauma, mirroring them, we can sit in that place of love inside of us and decide to respond from there. I know what Father is asking us inviting us into is hard work. It is heart work, but the heart is a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. And the more I use my heart with the people who share this way of seeing, the stronger I become. I was with both of these beloveds in downtown LA last summer when, in the wake of the ICE raids that terrorized our city, that continue to terrorize our city, we saw militarized streets, we saw our protests met with astonishing military force, we saw the helicopters and the tear gas and the batons and the rifles all around the federal building. And there were faith leaders who, inspired by our wisest ancestors who picked up those diamonds, called for love above all, we put our bodies between the protesters and the men with machine guns, and we sang the old songs. And I remember getting a nudge from another rabbi, Rabbi Susie. She's like, Valarie, you pray. I'm like, okay, I'll pray. She's like, no, pray that way. And she turned me around, and I'm facing the wall of officers with their batons. And I can feel the little girl in me shake, because I was badly hurt, badly injured by a police officer 20 years ago, and I never really healed. And so I'm back in the streets. Why am I back in the streets? I'm shaking, and I close my eyes. And I begin to recite my grandfather's song prayer, Shabbat Tati Vana Lagi. Tati Vana Lagi. Bad Brahm Sarnai. Jogad Hamare Ramkar. Dukh Lage Na Pai. Hot winds cannot touch you. Hot winds cannot touch you. You are shielded by the infinite. And in that moment, as I'm reciting, I hear the people behind me singing their ancestor songs. And it was like that song of love coming down through the millennia, creating a shield around us. And I felt such peace in my heart. I could sit in that sovereign space inside of me. When I opened my eyes, the officer's baton was a few inches away from my body. They had advanced their entire line while my eyes were closed. You know what? I wasn't shaking anymore. I don't know how to tell you this, but it was like in that moment, they could beat me, they could arrest me, they could take my life, but they could not end me, because I was part of a song of love that began long before me and that would go on and on. And that kind of love can never be defeated. That's the kind of love this administration does not understand. The flashbang grenades went off, the curfew was called, we had to leave, but the people they're detaining in the federal building, they cannot leave. And so we came back a week later And this time I was like, what if hundreds of us had that feeling inside of our hearts? What if we're all coming from that place of love? And so we came back, hundreds of us, this time with flowers. And we placed flowers at the steps of the detention center for the families that they've caged. And then I thought, okay, revolutionary love is the choice to leave no one outside of our circle of care. And I looked at those officers, I'm like, they're our brothers too, even if they have forgotten it. And so I placed flowers at their feet, one by one. It was so hard to look at them. I couldn't look at that first one, but I looked at the second one, and it was just this moment of human, can I see you? Can I see you? And it was so hard work, but heart work, right? I laid the flowers down, the vigil ends, and I turn around to leave. And I hear, ma'am! And I turn around, and it's that first ICE agent. He goes like this. He's the one with the gun, so I return to him. And he says, thank you. And he puts out his hand. What do I do? In this very spot, you pointed your rifle at me. You held your baton over me. And now you extend your hand to me? What do I do? Revolutionary love is the choice to block your actions with one hand and extend the other with the hope that you will take it, or one day your children will take it. For the brief high of domination is nothing compared to the infinite love and joy of true community. I had just said those words in that speech at that vigil. I'm like, oh, I have to take his hand. I don't know whether that officer is going to stop hurting our people. But I want to be the one who believes in that possibility. That is who I want to be in the story. And I think that's a question for each of us. Can we be brave enough to see no stranger? Can we be brave enough to tend the wound? Because when we are brave, that kind of courage is contagious. And in the weeks and the months that followed, people all across the country began to bring flowers. Portland, Chicago, I just flew back from Minneapolis, where they're singing at the base of hotels, asking ICE agents it's okay, you can change your mind. That kind of love, those networks of care that don't leave anyone behind, not even them, that is what those who want to rule by authoritarian power, they cannot see it. They cannot understand it, and they cannot defeat it. And it feels good. It feels good. It's irresistible. It's irresistible to be over here, to see through the eyes of love. And that, no matter whether you belong to a religion or not, I think that is why we believe that love is the answer, that revolutionary love is the call of our times.
Thank you. Sharon, I would love you to reflect on that, and I guess to do so in light of the question of how you grapple with the ideas of evil and sin in the Jewish tradition. The next Jewish holiday on Monday, this coming Monday night, is Purim, which marks the triumph of good over evil. The Jewish mystical tradition, we've heard frequent references to mysticism, has as an anchor concept the notion of the Sitra Achra, the dark side, the sort of evil side. There are notions of sin and evil deeply embedded in the Jewish tradition. I'm just wondering how you, as someone who believes in the radical goodness of all, confront evil and sin as Jewish expositors have for thousands of years.
So I'll share that I gave a Yom Kippur sermon basically rooted in the wisdom of Father Greg Boyle, because I was so upside down about what was happening in our streets that I found myself driving down to Homeboy just before the High Holy Days, just to sit at your on the other side of your desk for a few minutes and hear you remind me that we must make love our home, and that our work is to create the space of cherished belonging. And somehow I realized as I was taking this in, and I went there knowing what you were going to tell me, honestly, because we've had this conversation before. I also wrote a book about it. I mean, I really believe it. It's already living in me, but I needed you to remind me. And as I was returning home, this is what I realized, which could be maybe an insufficient answer to your question, David, but maybe helpful. I had been wrestling with the story from our tradition of King David, who behaved terribly, who was, like so many men in power, able to forget why he was put into the world in the first place, and that was to serve, and not have others serve him. And there's this incredible story after David rapes Bathsheba and then has her husband Uriah killed in battle. There's this story where Natan, the prophet, comes into the palace and rebukes David. But the way that he rebukes David is not by pointing the finger in his face and saying, "You are a rapist and a murderer and a shanda, an embarrassment to our people." But instead, he tells him this really tender story about a man who's very wealthy and has lots of sheep, but his next door neighbor has only one sheep and is so precious to him. Some of you know this story, of course. And that one sheep is so precious to the poor man, and that he treats it like his own daughter, and it eats at his table, and they snuggle it in bed at night, which is the weird part of the story, but forget that. And yet when a traveler comes through town and is hungry, the rich man doesn't want to give up any of what he has, so he goes and takes his neighbor's sheep and slaughters it and serves it. And King David, when he hears this story, is so outraged. Something's awakened in him. He used to be a shepherd. He used to care for the most vulnerable animals, and it awakens his moral imagination. And he says, "Whoever that man is, he needs to be punished." And Natan says, "That man is you." And I realized that it's exactly what Father Greg has been telling us for all of these years. If we've been listening from the beginning of Homeboy Industries to Tattoos on the Heart, through this most recent book, Cherished Belonging, which is that our work in the world is to see each other through the eyes of love. And that is the only way that we could ever possibly assist in the transformation of a person from someone who's willing to do the kinds of things that King David was, to somebody who was awake in his own moral sensibility. And so my answer to the question is, instead of categorizing someone as fundamentally good or evil, and Valarie and I share this sense of, like, the language is so grotesque when we throw people away, we dispose of people because they're evil, because they're monsters, because they are. And what would it mean instead to try to see them through the lens of love? And you opened, David, by speaking about curiosity and care, the connection between curiosity and care. And I really believe that we're living through a massive curiosity deficit. We are not curious, we are certain. And one of the students asked this question earlier when we're together: how do you respond to someone who's in great pain with the certainty that comes from religious practice? Thank you for the question. And my answer is, we didn't have time to answer, but my answer is, I don't answer pain with certainty. I answer pain with love, or I try to. And what that does is it opens up the possibility of something better. And I try to practice this. I try to practice engaging with curiosity when I'm in pain, by seeing another person as also in pain. And can our sorrow meet each other's sorrow? Because we have different narratives, but we have the same sorrow. So can we attach to that? Can we see that my pain is real and so is yours? Because we keep talking about spaciousness, and I think a lot about capaciousness. And what I've realized, especially over the last 2.5 years, is God gave us capacious hearts, capacious enough to hold our own pain and take our own pain seriously, and also see each other's. And so can we take that capacious, spacious grandness of our souls and actually look to each other with love. And what happens when we do? Can we look into each other's eyes and not look away and search for the sorrow and search for the soul? And if so, what happens to that person and what happens to us? That might be the transformational agent that's missing in our time, moving away from that certainty and instead moving toward love.
Right. And I might add, reimagining the stranger as our neighbor, and perhaps even putting that category of the stranger in the dustbin of history. Because even though it's so deeply rooted in our tradition that we should respect the stranger because we ourselves were once strangers, it is an intrinsically distancing concept. So I've been thinking a lot after reading Valarie's book about really the imperative to reimagine that even what was for this series this year a subheading, kindness to the stranger, right? A kind of paternalistic kindness towards someone whom we are kind of between the lines imputing to be lesser.
Can I
I
wanted to just disagree with you a little bit, and I'm thinking about Rabbi Joachim Prince's speech that he gave just before Dr. King spoke and gave his
Poor
I Have
guy
a
who
Dream
had to
speech.
speak just before Dr.
Poor
King
guy,
in
poor guy.
1963.
You think it was hard talking after Valarie? Imagine this guy. But he spoke about, as a Jew who came from Berlin, who had survived the Holocaust, why he stood in solidarity with the struggle for black justice in America, for justice for black Americans. And he said, this is a solidarity that's born out of my pain and yours, right? And so I'm not sure I'm ready to throw away the concept. I think it's more, maybe it's a semantic issue, but I think the idea of recognizing the way that our tradition says, Ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim, that because you know the heart of the stranger, because that's also you. Everybody here knows what it's like to walk in a room and feel invisible. That might be our superpower. I don't want to pretend that doesn't exist.
I
right?
absolutely agree. This may be a semantic matter
Yeah.
because I absolutely agree with the imperative of not only recalling but putting that past to work in the
Putting
name
the
of
past to work.
in the name of justice. It's a question of what one calls the person who we think underwent something similar to us, like whether we continue to call them a stranger, because that can be anyway. We'll continue this offline. I wanted to get to some of the wonderful questions that our audience has posed, and I commend you for confronting that technology on the screen and being able to do so. But maybe on this very theme, a question that's directed to Jihad, but I think anybody can answer it. You recall that story from 1,400 years ago of the nightly exercise of, was it Muhammad or was it an acquaintance of Muhammad?
No, it was just a random
person.
follower of Muhammad, yeah.
Follower of Muhammad. What is the practice to purge hate from the heart? What actually could that look like? Because
So there's I'll tell another parable that Muhammad taught his followers. He said, first of all, there's this notion in Islamic teaching that when we transgress in life, we should try and learn from our mistake and repent. And repentance includes acknowledging you're wrong, turning back to God and with remorse, and trying your darndest not to repeat that a shortcoming again. You might fall short, but at least having the sincere intention. However, if you've transgressed against another person, not just against yourself or God, there's an additional step of rectifying what you did in transgressing against someone else, making it right. If you took something, returning it. If you spoke ill about it, try and make up for the damage you've caused to the person's reputation or feelings, etc. So you do whatever you can. So there's this notion of this very kind of, on the day of judgment, Muslims believe like Christians in a day of judgment, heaven and hell. And unlike certain kinds of Christians, there is no guaranteed salvation just because of belief. I know that there was a debate about this at some point, right? Reformation, this was like a major event in Christian theology. But in Islam, you're not guaranteed paradise if you're Muslim, and you're not guaranteed hellfire if you're not Muslim. I mean, it's kind of everyone's going to be judged according to their own particular capacity and circumstance. And there's this notion that God is capable. He's most merciful, most forgiving, and that's the most oft-repeated phrase that God uses in the Scripture about Himself, that He's compassionate, merciful, loving, forgiving. But that He reserves for other people the right to forgive or not things that were committed against them. And so there's this notion that this individual on the day of judgment is being assessed, and he comes and he goes, man, this guy committed so many transgressions against me, I want him punished, right? And so God shows this person who's demanding that the person who wronged him in this world is punished in the hereafter. He shows him paradise. He gives him a glimpse of paradise. He goes, with what are you going to purchase this? And the person is dumbstruck. So he brings the other person who transgressed against him. He said, forgive your brother and take him by the hand, and both of you enter my paradise. When I was a little kid, I was 10 years old. I went to the occupied West Bank. And my family was from Hebron, where Abraham, our common ancestor, was buried. And I was there for the entire summer, and it was still part of the school year at that time. And I would witness, as a 10-year-old, unprepared, brutality of occupation, little school kids lined up, beaten, their books kicked around, and, on their way to or from school. And, it was very traumatic for me. And so when I got married and had kids of my own, my kids wanted to go and visit our cousins, their cousins. Excuse me. My wife and I decided not to do that because we didn't want to traumatize them like we were traumatized. She's from Kashmir, not from Palestine, but it's very similar experience because it took a long time to overcome that trauma. I mean, my oldest kid, who's 25 now, but he was 6 years ago, he really wanted to come with me to Palestine and visit his cousins. I told him, no, you're not ready, you're not ready. And one day I was driving him to school, and we were at a light, and the nose of my vehicle was slightly in the crosswalk, and some young kid walks across the crosswalk, and he hits the hood of the car and makes a gesture, and he keeps going. And I turned to my son and I said, son, don't let that bother you. He goes, I'm not bothered. I go, tell me more. What do you mean you're not bothered? He said, oh, that guy probably just had a bad day. Woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Like, he has his own issues. It wasn't, we didn't really do that much to interfere with his life, but he was just sort of taking it out on us. That summer I took him. Well, I said, you're ready. And we went. And we faced trauma. But he, amongst my 4 kids, is the only one I've taken so far. So to tie it back together, I think that there's a religious aspect, but also there's just a human and parenting aspect. That how is it that we can, as a practice, try and empathize with other people, even if they're transgressing. There's one teaching of Muhammad that says, help your brothers or sisters who are fighting, the one who's right and the one who's wrong. They said, well, we understand how we can help the one who's being victimized, but how do we help the victimizer? He said to stop that person from victimizing, not with hatred, but to just hold them, embrace them, meet them where they're at, and help them get beyond whatever is pushing them to act out in that way.
Thank you. Okay, I want to thank you. I want to combine 2 questions, one of which is a very broad question about what do we mean by justice and how do we get there, and the other is a much more specific question that asks, particularly to Father Greg, how can we process harms being committed against immigrant communities? And in particular, how are we going to make our way over the next few years in light of the government imperative to push immigrants beyond our boundaries? So this is a very specific question about the next few years, and a broader question about how do we get to a higher state of justice in the world.
I just came back from Minneapolis, so it was blown away by the spirit, and it was truly inspiring. And so when the President of the United States said, speaking of Minnesota, speaking of the Somali community, calling them garbage, people in Minnesota just left their homes. They went to the mosques, they went to the Somali community centers, and they said, "You are our neighbors." And in fact, a commentator, I don't know how, was calling the particular resistance that is there, and similar to Los Angeles, they called it neighborism. And we were talking earlier about, loving God and love your neighbor as yourself. And somebody said once, well, we don't love ourselves that well, so I'm not sure. And I heard somebody once say, you should love your neighbor as you love your child. As soon as you hear it, you go, okay. Because there's no distance and there's utter clarity. And so in Minneapolis, they're schlepping, they're generous, they're helping. How can we feed you? How can we bring food to this place? How can we offset the fact that your business really, you have no customers? How can we escort your kids safely home from school? And it was just, I just found it so moving. And I have hope in that, I believe in that. And we were discussing, a bunch of homies in my office, kind of what was going on during that particular time that you were talking about. And somebody said, well, what do we do now? And before I could say anything, a homie in the office said, love is always the next thing to do. And I thought, it doesn't get better than that. So, but you have to find concrete ways to do that. And Minneapolis was so heartening because it's so concrete. And it's standing in 20 below cold, and you have signs that say, leave my neighbors alone, or we love our migrant neighbors, And I also feel like, so I believe that everybody's unshakably good, no exceptions. We belong to each other, no exceptions. If you believe those two things, then you roll up your sleeves. You don't throw up your hands, you roll up your sleeves, because you go, oh no, we're all in this together, let's go. And everybody's doing something. And so I think it's important to, Daniel Bergen used to say, stand where you must, be human there. And I think that's the call. And people connect to it. And more people, as they gave assent to that line about, kindness, people, that's where people are. Are the vast majority of people there? Yes, they're there. You don't need a poll to tell you that as long as people stay healthy and we help each other become whole and well, then we're going to acknowledge, that people are unshakably good and we belong to each other, and let's roll up our sleeves. So I am more hopeful than not.
Amazing. We need to hear that now.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have about 5 more minutes left, and I want to ask a final question and offer everybody a chance to address it. And it has to do with what we've been modeling here tonight, which is the power of multi-faith conversations and coalition building. And I want to ask you, Sharon, to start us off and give us your sense of what the added value, the power of the multi-faith conversation is, and how important you think multi-faith coalition building is to navigating us to a better place.
You want me to tell the Ed Bacon story? Is that what I'm hearing? I think, yeah. I'm happy to.
You could say so.
Okay.
Well, yes, Ed.
Yes, Anne. I shared earlier at the dinner that we had with some of the students an incredible experience that I had as a young rabbi when I first moved out to Los Angeles, and I was invited. Do we have any All Saints Pasadena folks in the room? No, not one. West Side. I became friends immediately with Reverend Ed Bacon, who is the rector of All Saints, who's an extraordinary hero in many ways, and he invited me to come join him on Christmas Eve for midnight mass, and I subsequently went to All Saints for many beautiful and meaningful experiences, including meeting Archbishop Desmond Tutu once, who I remember said it was his first time here, the first time that he had come to the States, and he said, you know, in the darkest of days when we were in prison, he said, once a year we would get a stack of letters that they would bring in, and we would read them, and they would be written by the good people of All Saints Church in Pasadena.
Wow.
Telling us, we remember you and you are not alone. And he said, and I used to say to Nelson, one day we're getting out of here and I'm going to Pasadena and I'm going to thank those people. And I remember that, which speaks to the need for moral imagination and for just for imagination generally. Like, this darkness is not, it's not where we land. This is just the beginning. So anyway, Ed Bacon in his most beautiful Christmas Eve service gives a sermon that night explaining Christmas to this, you know, cathedral full of Christians and a couple Jews and Muslims, and sitting in the front row. And he tells us this beautiful story about Joseph and Mary being so poor and so cast out from society that literally she's in labor and nobody will give up their bed for her. And it just broke my heart, and I was weeping. And he said all of the next 2,000 years is an attempt to remedy that wound, and that to be a good Christian means to give up your bed, you know, when somebody's in labor. And so, what happened in that moment was I heard this story, already a rabbi, 6 years of seminary, and I realized in that moment that I too had a faith narrative. I had a meta narrative that was at the heart of my faith and at the heart of my activism, at the heart of my being. And it was different from Ed Bacon's narrative, because that's a Christian narrative and I'm a Jew, in case you couldn't tell. And my narrative was the story of the Exodus from Egypt, and it was the eternal journey on a trajectory from darkness to light and from enslavement to liberation and from degradation to dignity. But that our stories were parallel to each other, and they both had the same destination, and that was the dream of a world of love and dignity and justice for all human beings. And so we would be really good partners in the work. And it did really deepen our relationship, and it deepened my commitment. And there were so many times that we sat on the stage at All Saints, and, you know, over the years, Jihad and I would sit and talk and just learn each other's stories. And I think that the instinct of our time is to entrench in the smallest sense of our tribes, because we're just in so much pain. Everybody's been traumatized. Everybody's been through immense grief and suffering, and we want to just entrench where it's safe and where it feels good. And in fact, the only way that we are going to navigate this storm is together. And the only way we're going to be able to plant the new future on the other side is if we gather up the seeds and protect and preserve them together, and then go out planting together. And so I'm so deeply aware of the need for my siblings from other communities, from other traditions, each of us drawing from the strength of our own, and able to really link arms into that future.
Valarie? A sibling?
I'll leave you with a question that I truly carry in my heart every single day. The future is dark. What if this darkness is not only the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if the story of America is one long labor, a series of expansions and contractions, and we are in a massive contraction right now, but this is our turn in the cycle. What if our America is not dead, but a nation still waiting to be born? What if all of our ancestors are surrounding us? Those who survived genocide and colonization and enslavement and sufferings untold, what if they're whispering in our ear, you are brave, you are brave? What if this is our time of great transition? The midwife says to breathe and to push. When I'm sitting with Father Greg, when I'm sitting with Rabbi Sharon, when I'm sitting with Imam, I am breathing because I can feel their ancestors' wisdom behind them, and I can feel that love strengthen the love in my own chest. And when I breathe that deep, it gives me the ability to push. I believe our task is to stay in the labor. Because here's the thing, I don't know how many more turns through the cycle it's going to take to birth the beloved community, the multi-racial democracy, the sustainable planet. I have to be honest, I don't know if we will live to see it. But just as our wisest ancestors did not live to see us, our only sacred task is to stay faithful to the labor. And when I'm laboring with love, fighting for justice becomes the most pleasurable way of being alive. It becomes the meaning of life. Because it's through love, all the way through.
Three things. The first, when you love your neighbor as your own child or as yourself, I was reflecting on in the Islamic tradition, the definition of neighbor. And yes, conceptually, the migrant, those who are, in need, the poor, the destitute, the marginalized, etc. But also quite literally, 40 houses in every direction from where you live is how it's defined in the Islamic tradition. And I have to say, I'm not that good of a Muslim. I know maybe 15 in every direction, but not 40. So let us assess, do a self-analysis on how good of a neighbor we are. Do we know? Because one tradition says your neighbor has a right upon you to not sleep hungry if you have been fed. So if you're making a soup, you make enough and share it with your neighbors to make sure that none of them go to bed hungry. And they said, well, what's a neighbor? 40 houses in every direction from where you live. Number two. One of my mentors taught me the next 2 points, number 2 and number 3. He says, the late Dr. Maher Atut, he said, we have the question all wrong. We're sometimes in the interfaith context assessing, is God on our side or on your side? And the question is not, is God on our side or your side? The question is, are we on God's side? And number 3, towards the same point, he said, light is additive. It is not competitive.
Thank you. Father Greg, final word.
Just brief. Not long ago, I was in my office, and homie was kind of, all the anguish and suffering of his life kind of overwhelmed him, and he was sobbing. And at one point, he stopped. During the crying, he said, has God disowned me? And he cried some more, and then he looked at me and he says, have you? And I realized in that instant, the only way that he'll know that this is not on God's mind is to know that it's not on mine either. And so all any human being needs to know is the truth of who they are, and then nothing can touch them. And once they see themselves as God does, nothing can touch them. And they recognize the goodness, and they live from the goodness. And so there are people, who govern, their access to their goodness is compromised. It doesn't mean that they're not good, or the goodness isn't there. They can't get at it. This is where we come in. This is where we help each other. And the poet Rumi says, when we have totally surrendered to that beauty, we shall be a mighty kindness. And that's our invitation, I think, at the time in which we find ourselves living.
Thank you. So I just want to remind everybody that we're all invited to a reception outside, and you'll have the opportunity to buy books of our panelists and have them signed. So I invite you to make your way out. But let us first thank our panelists for really an extraordinary conversation.